Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I am Hannah Broderud.
And I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Chris Province, and thank you for joining us here today. I'm excited about today's episode. Today we're going to talk about community-based employment and what is it, why is it important. We'll probably pull some thread based on our last episode to kind of dig into, and if we project out, what's the future of work? What could it look like? I love the conversation you guys had with our previous guest, and I want to dig into that a little bit more. So what we know is that people are looking for something different in their work, but we don't always have the words to describe what that is. So let's dig into this topic just a little bit. At a core kind of functional level, Luke, what is community-based employment?
Well, I think we're trying to figure that out. The fact that we're calling it community-based employment, like we just kind of made that up.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're on a journey of, we know that with the Great Resignation being, I don't know, the cherry on top of this movement and change in people's expectation for their work experience, that there's something out there that people are envisioning, and maybe envisioning is the wrong word, that a piece of their soul is kind of grasping towards.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we talk about a lot of the, like, how do we create inclusive people practices? How do we create a purpose-centric business? But I think the challenge, at least me personally, this thing I'm trying to solve, the puzzle I'm trying to put together is, I don't want to just talk about purpose-driven business. I want to talk about what are the outcomes of that. And I think it's that work is a community and that work supports a community. And so I think that's what we're talking about. And then I also just want to give context that we've been in this industrialized society for just a couple hundred years. And part of what I think we're also trying to figure out is the way that people lived and worked 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. I think we're seeing some glimpses that maybe that's more of what we're moving towards in the future. And this whole centralized business, industrialized thing, structurally, it was maybe more a period of time than, oh, it's always going to be that way. And I'm not saying we're going to go back to, agricultural society. I'm just saying, like, people working from the home and having meaningful relationship with coworkers, like, that's not that different than what people built for themselves in 1850, So yeah, that's my answer. It's not a great answer yet, but I'm really excited to talk about it.
Right. That's why we're going to have the conversation, right? Is to maybe get more clear about what this is.
Yeah. My take is we as humans are wired for social connection. We are social animals. We operate in groups, families, tribes, communities. It's what we do. It's how we survive. We're not designed to be like a moose or a grizzly bear who live out most of their lives in solitude, except for when they have babies, right? We are an animal that is, designed to live together, cooperate together. Now, I think the bigger question is, what makes a group of people a community, right? So if we all work at the same building, or we are all, and now we're all dispersed, so maybe we don't work at the same building, but we still work for the same company. Are we a community or not? Does it feel like a community, and does it need to be a community? So I think we'll need to dig into a little bit, like, what is community too,
Mhm.
and what roles have community, like what types of communities have played important roles in our lives historically as humans.
Mhm.
And now in this kind of modern way in which we work in companies, which is kind of a recent made up thing, right? If you look at all of human
Mhm.
history, what role does that play, and does it fill that role for community, that need for community that we all have, whether we're consciously aware of it or not?
Yeah. And just to maybe illustrate this a little bit more clearly, when we talk about how people lived most of human history,
Mm-hmm.
if you think about a village, right? They worked together, prayed together, cared for one another when someone got sick, went to war together. And when I think about the future of organizations, those are the types of things that I think leaders who grasp it and want to think differently, people have a need to do things like that in community.
Mm-hmm.
But our society and like urbanized, city living, whatever, right? It's not super conducive in the United States for people living, working, praying, going to war together, caring for one another when there's like, that doesn't just happen naturally in a town
Mm-hmm.
anymore. And, but people still need it. And I think they want it. And so what does that look like? And what's the role of a leader in meeting some of those needs?
Yeah. And I'd even venture to say, what is the role of a building? And is a building necessary for community?
Yeah.
Because I think it's an interesting question when you think historically about community.
I agree. And one definition of community that resonates for me, and we use this definition with an organization I worked with where we did say we're a community.
Mm-hmm.
It was a nonprofit organization. We said that the employee base was a community. We lived, not everyone, but most of the employees lived kind of on site. It was a retreat center. And so we use this. They have shared purpose, shared possessions, and a shared place.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of our working definition. And it is interesting in this dispersed kind of future that we're looking at. What is that shared place?
Mm-hmm.
Shared possessions? How do you interpret that? How do you create that? Shared purpose, we know how to do really well,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's what we're all stars at. These other ones, I think, are going to be really interesting to try and figure out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And kind of that physical role, I think about, tribal longhouses, council houses, chapels, even, that are on cultural grounds. I think there has to be a place to commune,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the idea. But then I think the design of those things is really open to interpretation. When I think about like the Cherokee Council House, it's stadium seating. Your elders sit on the front row. Your youngest members of your clan sit in that clan section, youngest all the way up to the top, with the idea that as you age, you move down rows until you're an elder and you get to sit on the front row. But the entire time you're growing up, you're observing, you're watching, you're seeing the behaviors of the people leading your clan and representing that to the tribe with the idea that you're learning those expectations, those beliefs, those values. And there's been many times I've thought about the boardroom and saying, man, if this boardroom was like a council house and that director had all of their employees, managers, supervisors, frontline, observing what was happening and how they were being represented into that space, what would happen to this organization? So, I mean, my pie in the sky is like, I'd love a boardroom that looks like a council house.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Another artifact, a boardroom's just an artifact of a culture, right?
Sure.
But another one's an org chart.
Mhm.
And we've played around with this internally with our own org chart and also for some clients, but making the senior leadership team, executive leadership team, like a relationship in the middle.
Mhm.
And then just like you said, stadium seating, on paper, it's branching out to all the stakeholders, all the responsibilities in the
Mhm.
organization. And, it's the same data, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that our artifacts are built up and down instead of outside to in,
Right.
it says something.
It does. And how you visually represent that, right? There's architecture involved. So how intentional are we about that architecture? Are we creating a top-down hierarchy? Do we invert the hierarchy and do it a down and up? But I really like this idea of it being an out to in
Mm-hmm.
type of topology, if you will.
Yeah, kind of speaking, here's something I want to speak into this idea of community-based employment is, thinking about how we did it in 1850 until today. And I mean, I hear the cynics. Well, we did everything like we did back then, blah, blah, blah. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Go along for the ride. Cynics kill hope. But thinking about traditionally the people that made the choice to work together, they made the choice to pray together. A lot of it was regional, right? Like in my certain geography. Then we come to this world of commutes, right? And I don't know what other word to use. Maybe you can inform this, but the very nature of leaving my home community to then go and do work in a community outside of that, only to then return and do other personal functions within my local geography. Like that system in and of itself is, like, I would use the word coercive because it's not organic. If it was organic, I wouldn't have to drive 40 miles to go to my office. So that's something that I would speak, like the physical nature of this. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, anyone with a commute is a migrant worker one day at a time.
Right.
And I think it's helpful to say something maybe a little bit crazy like that, because it allows me then to say, okay, well, what is the life of a migrant worker, right? You travel maybe across the country, maybe across a border. What are the conditions that you usually work in because you're away from home, away from accountability? The people leading you aren't seeing your family and kids, right? You're in a sterilized environment that you don't have possession of or similar say in, right? And then your resource, like you're just there for a resource and you're sitting at home to support a different community. Really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of parallels.
As a leader, do you want a whole staff? Do you want thousands of migrant workers?
Yeah. And the other extreme is people who live at their place of work. Right. And Luke, you've experienced that. We're working with a client now where there's, some navigating of an owner who lives on the property and just making some decisions for that family. Is that the best thing for that family? Is it the best thing for the company when there's no separation?
Right.
And so it's just an interesting thing to think about, right? But if you do think traditionally agricultural society, which is even further removed, we were hunter-gatherers and we just were nomadic groups that wandered, right? And we were gathering food and living together, but we weren't going away to go to work necessarily. We traveled together. And then civilization we started cultivating, we started becoming stationary because we were growing things. And so now we had a farm. And okay, so now we live and work all day, every day in the same place, area, right? Except for maybe when you'd go off to war or you'd have to go hunt or do something, but you'd come back to this place. And so, yeah, I don't know, what does this evolution look like, right? Because now we have this ability to we can be worlds apart where the physical product of our work happens and where we are located.
And that's the other wrinkle in this, is that we're all much more part of a global community now
Mm-hmm.
than at any time in our history.
Mm-hmm.
And so our communities, whereas before community was maybe my village, and then maybe I knew some people who came and traded, or a family member in the neighboring village or whatever. So maybe I had a core community and then some sort of wider something.
Yeah.
Well, now it's a little bit more complex, and maybe like Russian nesting doll type thing. We're part of global community. We're part of a hemisphere. We're part of a nation. We're a part of a state. We're part of a city, a town, a suburb, a family,
Mm-hmm.
So I think when we talk about things like org charts and commutes and boardroom design, it's tempting to say like, oh, well, everyone should build their stadium like the Longhouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the reality is the level of complexity in the type of work that we're doing, what our products are, what core competencies we have,
Right.
how connected we are to a global community versus a local community. There's a lot of choice to be made. And maybe my conviction is that a lot of people aren't making those choices intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. And so maybe that's what we're calling for, is how do we intentionally make the choice of what communities are we engaged with, and how are we building community internally? And there's probably 1,000 different policies, practices, initiatives, projects that could be employed to be more intentional about community, right? But the work is in having the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I would say though is this: it's not an absolute.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, like, by default, you have some function of community.
Yeah.
Like, even if it's not intentional.
Sure.
I think the idea is it's not a yes or no. It's not a green light, red light sort of thing. It's on a continuum, and just being intentional about where do you need your company to land, or your organization to land on this continuum to really elevate performance. Because I think about, what types of organizations, and let's take it just directly to enterprise, what types of enterprises need to be community based. The strongest one would be if you're in the service industry and not dealing in a product transaction. So if you are an experiential based where nobody leaves with a product, i.e. hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You eat the food there on site, you stay in the hotel room, you play the game. You don't walk out with anything, but you've made a transaction. Those environments would be, I would say, to the far side of the continuum, to say the more community-based those places are, the better that business is going to perform, because you get the higher levels of engagement, personal relationship, responsiveness, and impressions of quality, which is the bounds of service that make those organizations work.
Yeah.
I think the middle of the continuum would be places that trade in other commoditized product. So if you're thinking about lumber, if you're thinking about metal, if you're distributing a product that is ubiquitous across an industry, that would be, like, I guess, kind of that very important that that's community based, but not quite like a non-product trade.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think far left, and I'm open to any challenge on my made up continuum here. I think far left is more traditional manufacturing type environments, because we know the motivational schematics of manufacturing is different than that of service. So, basically, I use the analogy, I can pay for performance in manufacturing and transact, stamp more things, make more money. On the service side, it doesn't matter how much money I offer somebody, they are not going to have a better relationship with someone as a result. I can't pay someone to develop a better relationship, but I can pay someone for physical labor. And that's emotional labor versus physical labor. And I think maybe what we're getting at here is the more emotional labor that there needs to be in an environment, the more case there is for the community-based employment to be farther on that side of the continuum.
Yeah, there's a lot of threads we can pull on that, because now we're getting into the difference between what science knows and what business does.
Sure.
And in traditional manufacturing environments, it's really practices that date back 150 years or longer to, industrial revolution type of things when this idea that people had to be managed and that creating this conveyor belt system where humans were there to transact, like how effective that is in modern society is open for debate. And what we're seeing, this whole great migration, great reshuffle, people are saying, I don't want to work in that environment. Like, I don't want to be transacted. I'm not going to show up to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think having this conversation now is important, right? Because I do think there are some quote unquote traditional workplaces that are going to go away because people are just going to say,
I'm not doing that work.
I'm not doing that anymore.
Well, I want to throw this at you. We've kind of scratched at this idea. You hear companies talk about, well, we're double bottom line or we're triple bottom line. Like just in that language, there's still this idea of these are three separate things that we're doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which will you talk through? What's double bottom line, triple bottom line?
So obviously bottom line would be just financial results, right?
Mhm.
A double bottom line company produces results for the organization and the generation of resource. And then there's a community benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, I think of like Tom's, right? Like you buy a pair of shoes, somebody else gets a pair of shoes. So if I run that business really well, multiple stakeholders benefit. The triple bottom line would be the benefit to the organization in creating resource, an external benefit to another community that it creates resource for, and a benefit to the team member. And like whether that's career development, resource gain, etc. So in a triple bottom line company, it's the company winning, the team member winning, and some other stakeholder group that's a benefactor of company output. So we scratch at it, I think, in that, but it's still very like A, B, C.
Mm-hmm.
But it does call out the interdependence that unless the first bottom line is good, nothing else matters.
Well, because we don't get to the other things.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that the case though? Like, here's where I'm thinking. I'm going to use us as a example.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we, as a team, 4 years ago, decided we wanted to do this thing. And I think we haven't done it in that order. Right? It was
Right.
like, it's an exercise in faith to say, if we create a valuable experience for anyone connected to our team, and we create value for the people that we serve, then of course there will be commercial success.
Mm-hmm.
And like, we wouldn't be here if we couldn't pay our bills.
Right.
But I don't think anyone on our team would say that they're fulfilling their vision of financial success and like they've arrived.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. I think everyone is still operating on faith that we can try and build this thing that shifts the priorities
Mm-hmm.
of what gets the most attention. And the third thing will come,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is what a lot of people assume in traditional business, but flipped around.
Mm-hmm.
If we're profitable, if what we're creating has value to customers or to community stakeholders, then yeah, we can hire more people and we can pay people and whatever else.
Right.
Right. So I'm just calling into question this assumption that has to be the order.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm kind of wrestling with this a little bit.
Yeah, I am too, because it's, I think for our team and just, to kind of share a little bit about how we're structured, Purpose and Performance Group has no employees. We're all independent contractors who choose to work together under this brand because we love the work that we get to do. And it's work that we want to do. And we love the people we do it with. And we choose to be together. And for me, what we do is all about community, right?
Mm-hmm.
I started out independent and I was doing this by myself. And I enjoyed the autonomy and the freedom. And I missed the community,
Mm-hmm.
right? So doing this together with you guys is more fun and more fulfilling than me being out there by myself, right? And so those are all intrinsically motivated reasons for me to continue to do what I'm doing, even when I feel like I'm not making enough money to do it,
Right.
based on the energy, both cost of time
Mm-hmm.
and emotional energy and cognitive energy that goes into doing this work, right?
Sure.
And so we're going to have another episode on compensation, but it kind of scratches that surface of what are the net benefits, right?
Right.
And let's think about compensation holistically like
Mm-hmm.
that, right? Now, it is also true that if as a company and as individuals we couldn't pay our bills, we wouldn't get to keep doing this in this
Mm-hmm.
way.
Right.
Yeah. And I just want to give an illustration. So yesterday at, I'll just say 20 hours ago, Hannah and I were in Big Sky, Montana, where she lives, and had finished some work there. And we're heading to the airport to come here to Tulsa, where we're recording this. And on the way, we stopped by where Hannah's partner, Kevin, has some of his equipment with his business.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of, serendipitously, I helped him with a little project on a dump truck that he has. And we laid down some sheeting in the back and working on bolting it on and whatever else. Something that he was able to do faster with two hands or with two people than one person.
Mm-hmm.
And the feeling that I experienced, leaving the equipment lot and heading down to the airport was just like, this is why we're trying to create what we're creating.
Mm-hmm.
Because that sense of community where I get an opportunity to have a meaningful, it's not like I did anything super valuable for Kevin, but I got to do something that was a part of his work and his life. And that's what I want. And yet, could I make 3 or 4 times what my take home is on the open market? Yes. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We all could.
Mm-hmm.
But we have chosen to prioritize that experience I got to have with you and Kevin over a dollar figure.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, an economist would say what that means is that has dollar value. That experience has dollar value.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I'm grappling with all of this. I'm not trying to tell people what to do. I'm just feeling that there's a lot of folks out there that want something that feels a little bit more holistic than, will you give me some money for my time?
Yeah. Well, with that, I want to carry on this conversation, but let's take a quick break and let's run a question of the day. And then we'll come back and pick up the rest of this. This is our spot where we get to learn a little bit about one another, maybe pull some thread on an interesting idea or concept. And, here is a hot question of the day. A couple weeks ago, Elon Musk dropped a memo. Would you call that a memo?
Well, I think what happened is he memoed his leadership team, it immediately leaked. And so then he doubled down and sent a letter to all the Tesla and SpaceX employees.
There we go. So he the double down, I think that's a great way to say it. So I want to say, let's play a little worthy or worthless. Like, what the hell was that? You want to give us a debrief and kind of let people know, like, we've got this out on our website. Luke wrote a blog about it, and it's a very compelling take on these kind of leadership behaviors that showed up as a result of this current environment. So you want to give us kind of a lowdown?
Sure. So essentially the meat of the memo was everyone has to be in the office 40 hours a week. If you don't want to do that, we'll assume that you've resigned if you keep working remotely. So that was the meat of it. I would say the way it was delivered doesn't help.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it's, hey, I know this is hard, but this is an operational requirement. Here's your resources. If you've made some sort of accommodation for yourself, if you've stopped, if you've changed childcare, if you have an elder at home that you're dealing, whatever, like there's nothing. Like
no
it's
acknowledgement of circumstance or hardship.
It's basically like we make things, we ship things. We're not going to be successful with people. I think he even used quotes, quote, calling it in or phoning it in or something. So it was very dismissive of anyone who might want to continue working hybrid or remote. So yeah, that was the meat of the statement. Again, you can read it if you want to go check out the blog.
Yeah. So this communication of our charge is to ship the best products on the planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot ship the best products when you are at home, employee, regardless of role. We expect you to be in the office, and if you do not show up here, we will assume you resigned. Hannah, worthy or worthless communication?
The communication is worthless, hands down. No qualms about that. The actual reality for a lot of businesses is a little more complicated than that. I'm not ready to say whatever policy you have, we're going to continue to work remote or we require everyone to be in the office. That's a hard thing to put worthy or worthless on without unpacking the complexities of that, right? And understanding what businesses are up against, what individuals are up against. But the communication, I'm ready to put a judgment on that.
Yeah. I'm going to be the just the counter person here and say, like, worthy. Not because it somehow serves a common good or anything like that, but he's making an explicit statement about what is important for that company. And in that communication, the only thing he has to be okay with is the expense of the communication. I am going to attract people that believe what I believe. And if you think that it's important to work in the office in order to ship the best products on planet Earth, because that's what I'm here for, another clear statement of value, we are going to ship the best products on planet Earth. I believe as the senior leader, we must all be in the office in order for that to happen. You will join me in that quest and be a member of this team and be in this circle, or you will choose not to join me in this quest and not be part of our community. And that is his right. And I would say effective leadership communication, regardless of good or harm or any of that or those considerations. He's saying, if you want to contribute to the meaningful work we're doing here, here's what that looks like. He's making that explicit. Therefore, I say that it's worthy. More than willing to be wrong.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, and I talk about this in the article. Yes, there's a right. As an owner, you have a right to do a lot of things, right? You can close the company. Like that's your
Mhm.
right. To me, there's a lot more gray area around what's wise and what's moral.
Mhm.
And those are really hard questions, right? What's
Mhm.
wise? What's our business strategy, right? There could be a strategy that aligns very well with what you said. I personally, if I'm going to read the tea leaves, which, Elon has done better than me, right? So maybe you shouldn't listen to me at all.
Right.
But I think this approach would have worked fine 10 years ago. I think the expense he's going to incur from it is going to be a growing expense the longer he holds on to that approach.
It's a great, but I'm thinking about size of markets,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the way that those particular brands are positioned, they're highly aspirational companies to work for.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So his
In
determination
current
is
state, they are.
right. That's right.
And so
But
we're,
what that's the gamble, right?
Right.
He's
Yeah.
saying it is most likely that there are enough people that will align with this belief, and those brands are desirable enough
Mhm.
that he can execute this strategy with a return. And I believe he's right because it's such a finite, the brands are only this big and the labor market's this big. He's going to find highly talented people that align with that belief and can probably advance the brands faster by getting rid of the people that aren't willing to bleed. And that's what I'm hearing. He's saying, like, if you're willing to bleed, come bleed together. And I'm not going to give merit to you say, well, you just work as hard at home, because that's not my worldview. Now, you are more than welcome to disagree with that. And I'm welcome to you disagreeing with that. But this company is going to work this way. And that is the power of senior leader intent.
100%. You have the right to make your beliefs explicit, right? And we talk about this all the time. We attract what we believe, and that is what will happen in this case. I don't know what the trajectory of Tesla and the other Elon Musk companies is going to look, 10, 50 years from now. I do think that this is a little bit of a watershed moment, right? Where there's a lot of awareness of, what do people really want, and what kinds of companies do they want to work for? What are the values that those companies hold, and can we align with those? You can require everyone to wear red. You can require everyone to, there's a lot of things you can require, and there's always a cost, because people might choose to subject themselves to practices that, they may or may not agree with for a while, and then no longer.
But in that, you're saying, there could be various parts about that discipline that is helpful to some
Mhm.
number of people.
Yeah.
That is not helpful to other numbers of people.
Right.
And that's really the most intriguing thing about that.
Mhm.
I mean, if you think about subcultures, and there's a place for everyone,
Mhm.
and I love how it highlights the role of senior leader intent. That's my favorite thing about it.
Mhm.
Luke, I guess what I want to call out, just because it's not something that would align with what any of us would build,
Mhm.
doesn't mean that it can't be an effective business strategy.
Sure.
If someone says, I want to be the most efficient, highest margin producer of any product, like, that is their right. Like,
Mhm.
go build that.
Mhm.
In fact, I would say my role is to help them make that true, because they're being explicit about their intent. And that's a different concept, juxtaposed to community-based employment.
Mm-hmm.
right? Here, we're going to transact. We're going to build things as efficiently as possible and get as much flow through as we can. And we are going to be a transactional organization. And as a result, I need you to transact with me.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can transact really effectively up and down this value chain, we can have a really successful enterprise. If that's how I define success.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just this idea of, I think everyone can define that differently. And the only way any company goes anywhere is when the senior leader communicates their intent with explicit terms.
So do you want to know if I think it's worthy or worthless?
Yes. Sing us out. What is it?
Yeah. So I think he missed on 3 main points. The first is boiling the employee-employer relationship down to a transaction very explicitly. All we're doing here is transacting hours for dollars. And the hours of yours that I own, I can make you do whatever I want. And while we know there are some people that say, yep, I'm done at 5, don't think about it anymore, I would say that that's mostly due to training and encultured behavior or emotional pain from previous work experiences. So I think objectively, that's less healthy than a more holistic life. So boiling it down to a transaction, I think is a bad strategy. The second is being the one person in the company that makes all the decisions. So I don't know that it's sustainable. Like, he can't decide all the policies. He can't decide every single minutia. I mean, maybe he can and is going to operate that way. But this idea of there's one way to do it, and that's my way. If you read the article, I rewrote his memo for him. And that's one of the key things that I changed, is saying, we have this preference, but I trust team leads to work with their teams to make the wisest decision possible about who needs to be where, when, right? And if there's any disagreement about that, please, let's talk about it, right? I think that's pushing down some of that decision. We know the closer decisions are made to actually where the problem is, the more effective solutions get created, right? He's just too far away from it to be smart about what's the right decision for every person. And then the last thing that I think he really messed up on was only thinking about products as the things that are physically shipped.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't go into the future thinking about employment as a product that our company offers, we are going to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if Elon would think about employment as a product in the same way that he thinks of his other products, and thinks of team members as customers for that employment product, he would be probably saying and creating a different work experience. So.
Right. He would say, we ship the best products on Earth and have the best employee experience on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Right?
We ship the best products on Earth, and one of those is our employee experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not the best on planet Earth, please give us feedback, because we're going to keep iterating this thing until it is.
Yeah. That's strong, man. That's super strong. Well, thank you guys for digging around on this one. And thank you all for listening in on our question of the day. Now back to our episode. Coming back into this question around community-based employment, I want to talk about this idea of well-being. I know you guys were fortunate enough to have a conversation around this. And the first question I have about well-being is, is it a moral imperative that if someone's going to lead, that they have to be responsible for the well-being of other people? And that's an honest question.
Yeah. And it's a good one. And it's one that Luke, you and I had a guest on recently, Jean-Philippe Svartal, happens to be my cousin, who's kind of a philosopher, writer, thinker, doing a lot of research for a book about well-being. And his hypothesis is that well-being is going to be something that companies will begin to measure, and it will become one of the metrics that we're measured by, and like team member well-being, so that it becomes really a recruiting tool as as individuals look at, okay, what is the average well-being score for this organization, that factors into the choice that I make, whether I want to work there or not. And then how that experience plays out will factor into maybe how long I stay there, or how engaged I am in my work, and how productive as a result that company becomes. So my take on that question would be, is it a moral imperative? I don't know. Will it become a choice that leaders can make if they want to create the best, most productive, most, impactful business? I do believe that's a choice that we should definitely take seriously.
Yeah. So I hear your real question there. And the first thing that popped into my mind was like, well, do we trust, Spider-Man's uncle with the whole, with great power comes great responsibility thing? And like, that's a real question. Do we believe that with responsibility, authority, power, influence, that there is moral responsibility? And I will say, for me, that is a faith question. And I don't necessarily mean religious faith or spiritual faith. What I mean is, like, what are the things I'm going to choose to hope in and be the foundation for my choice and my life? And I have two options when I look at it. I have the option to be cynical and say, this world is a hard place. The only person I'm accountable to is myself and the people I choose to be accountable to. And other people have choice.
Yeah.
I have choice. If people don't want to be a part of my transacting and they don't want to, experience everything that being a part of my team is, like, they can choose to go somewhere else. Or I can choose to say, I believe that there's some sort of responsibility that does come with influence. And I believe that I'm obligated to steward that responsibility in a positive, altruistic way.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean being a pushover, and it doesn't mean just being rainbows and unicorns. But what it means is that when I'm making the hard decisions around commercials or strategy, that one of the things I'm weighing seriously is, what is the impact to the team? Because they don't all get to sit on the front row where I am. They might be on the back row, right, watching, but like, I have responsibility to consider what their experience is going to be. So for me, what I choose is that the answer is yes, that there's a moral imperative.
Right. And that's where, I think we've landed appropriately on what is the take on community-based employment. Everyone has to make a choice on what type of organization they're going to create. Every leader has to make that choice. And either you make that choice intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah. Because
we're all creating a legacy. There's only people that understand that fact and people that don't. It's making the choice to say, if I'm going to be a leader, I accept and I raise my hand to be responsible for the well-being of others, or I will execute my right to not accept that obligation and make it all about the transaction, make it about efficiency, make it about do the things.
There's resource to be taken in the world.
Yeah.
And my goal is to extract that resource as efficiently as possible.
Right.
And if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. Right. That's the other option. And I like can't get on board with it.
Well, okay. So let's try this on. I have the right to extract resources that I see available by whatever means I deem appropriate. Or I have the responsibility as a citizen of this community and another human being to lift and steward the development and progress of others and my neighbors and the people I'm surrounded by. So this idea of rights versus responsibility is the conversation.
Yeah. And that picks up on, a conversation we had recently with Brooke Loneman on the podcast. She's a sustainability professor, right? And talking about these sustainable systems. That is, when I take something out of the ground, I put something back into the ground. Like thinking about things circularly. So even as leaders, what we're extracting out, what are we putting back in? How are we creating a system that's resilient, that's sustainable, that can support itself and generations to come and have a positive net impact on the world? And so, yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Luke. I choose to take that stance and look at, yes, this is a moral imperative. We've been meeting some people from, from Montana's. We've had different guests on, right, in the Bozeman and Big Sky community. And in Big Sky, this is a big conversation because so there's two levels here where we can think about employment and the community within an organization, but also the community that organization is a part of, right? Back to your kind of nesting dolls analogy. So I think historically humans lived and worked in the same place. When we now have the opportunity to telecommute and we can create online communities, there are ways to create meaningful online community, right? And we had Rachel Hicks on recently as well, who talked about some of the ways that we can do that. But when we no longer live in the place where we work, or we no longer work in the place where we live, what impact does that have on the community? So I'm thinking specifically, like in Big Sky, there's a ton of construction development happening. Most of the homes that are being built are for people who don't live full-time in that community, who don't work there, who don't contribute to the local economy. And it creates a lot of disruption and a lot of challenges, right? How do we create a community that's vibrant and sustainable where we can have the services and people have affordable places to live who actually work there and provide the services that the visitors or guests or part-timers are looking for? And so there's a little bit of a disconnect, right? And I think that's part of the leadership challenge in today's environment of, okay, so if we do choose to look at employment as community and community-based and foster community-based employment, how do we do that if we're not all living and working in the same place?
Yeah. And I want to go back to this. Let me just give an example of what we're talking about. Facebook, Twitter, the big tech companies, right? They have this habit of going to the Capitol and testifying and saying, well, like, yeah, we're totally open. We think we need to be regulated. You guys just need to pass something and we'll comply with it. But we're not going to change our practices until that happens.
Right.
And it's this idea of like, we think there's probably the right thing to do that will impact our bottom line negatively, right? Might decrease our margin in some way, but we think it's probably morally, ethically, socially helpful. But you have to keep me accountable.
You have to make me.
You have to make me. I will not make myself. And that's the difference between our path, I'll say like our team sitting here, and the path of Facebook.
Right.
These are
Yeah.
things that probably shouldn't be compared. Like
Yeah.
we're very apples and oranges, right? But when we are convicted about what we think is ethically, morally right, we always make that choice
Mm-hmm.
to the detriment of the bottom line without anyone telling us to.
Mm-hmm.
We create our own standard. We do not outsource our business morals to other people to tell us what our business morals should be.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time with someone saying, well, my first responsibility is to shareholders. So like until the government passes legislation, like they're always way in the back seat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I don't think I don't think it holds water if you really sit down and think about it. So
Yeah.
that's we're getting off community a little bit, but I do think it ties back into well-being because as you said, Hannah, this well-being thing
Mm-hmm.
that is getting a lot of research right now. And I agree, like sites like Glassdoor
Mm-hmm.
are a step on the path of employees looking at the marketplace and saying, okay, well, I can see your EBITDA and I can see your, revenue for the year and I can see how many employees you have and I can see star rating reviews from people who are maybe disgruntled or maybe happy or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you did yourself to make your rating look better, right? But I can also see this independently verified, just like your finances are, this
Mhm.
independently verified well-being score. And that's going to be a big factor in where I choose to work.
Yeah.
So I do think we're on that path. The question is like, who's going to take that mantle on themselves first
Mm-hmm.
before the market
Yeah.
makes it so painful they have to do
Who's
it.
going to publish it their way
Yeah.
versus being regulated to publish it?
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And that's what's going to require the courage. And I think right now it's a big move opportunity. Like if you want to make a dramatic shift in the way our brand is perceived, like, yeah, there's an opportunity there to say, here's how our team members, reflect or feel about their own well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And then keep it in mind. I just want to call out, remember, like there's this whole idea of emotional well-being, intellectual, physical well-being. Like we have to do all the kinds of work to be all the types of well.
Yeah.
Hey, that's just something I always like to plug about well-being.
Yeah.
Is we don't get to be well without doing labor around those tenets.
Mm-hmm.
So let's sing us out today as we wrap up this conversation on community-based employment, kind of final hot takes, words of wisdom, maybe even an ask of leaders that are out there. Like what can we do right now to set us on a more intentional path about how we decide about this?
Yeah. So really the point of this episode is community,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how does a business think about community and what kind of community they want to be intentionally? And so just super practically for folks listening, I'd go back to that communities have shared purpose, they have shared possessions, and they have a shared place or sense of place. And I would encourage you to just sit down and think about that. Like, what is that for you? What is that for your team? And how do you get intentional about, shared purpose is, I think, maybe not the easiest. Shared possessions is easy, right? We have assets that we steward. We have products that we steward together, right? Shared purpose, we have the path on how to clarify that. So that shouldn't be a hard one to solve. But this shared like sense of place and like this place is ours. In this place, we do things a certain way. In this place, these values are lived and seen. These are the assets, like that longhouse,
Mm-hmm.
place where the most important decisions are made. What is that? How do you create that? And man, I just want to I love this idea, Chris. I've never thought about it before. I'm going to steal it from you. But what if every board meeting was live streamed to every employee?
Mm-hmm.
What outcomes would be different?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, no one should be uncomfortable with that, right?
Right.
If you're a high character leader, you say, bring it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The people who don't say bring it on,
yeah,
that's a little scary.
That's a
Right.
little scary. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think practically, the first place to start is to understand what is employment really like at your company, right? I would say that's probably, if we're going to get really practical, let's start there. Assess the current state. What does it feel like? Do people feel like it's a community? Does it feel valuable to them to come to work or to log into their computer screen? And there are different ways you can do that, right? There's surveys you can make. You can have interviews. You can have casual conversation. But just start with curiosity, right? Try to tease out, is this a community, and in which ways is it a community, and does that community benefit the overall well-being of our team members?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity to take inventory. I think looking at, what is our current employment product and where are we on this continuum today?
Mm-hmm.
And is that where we want to be?
Yeah.
What are the things that we can move it? What are the things we can do to move it one way or the other? And that's exactly the type of conversations we like to have. So if you're a leader and you want to have that conversation, please reach out to us. We're at purposeandperformancegroup.com or any of your social channels. Easy to find, and love the conversation. And speaking of that, thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Luke, for an awesome conversation today and very thought-provoking. And let's go see how we can make this apply with, our partners across the country.
And thank you both for being valuable members of my personal and professional community.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo, and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.